Hello, Chris Recap here. Today we are going to explain a science fiction movie titled Unbroken. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button for 5 years of good luck. Try it, it works. The film opens with the scene of American military jets flying over the Pacific Ocean during World War II. Our lead, Louis, is also in the jets, fighting for his country. They are ambushed by their enemies and get into an air combat. Despite the attack, Louis and his crew successfully drop bombs on the enemy-held land and complete their mission. The scene shifts to Louis's childhood, revealing him to be a troublesome and morally corrupt kid. His father has to slap him in the head to stop him from checking out a woman in church. Up next, he's seen running from a street cop after stealing random accessories. He adds them to his secret stash and drinks liquor, disguised in a milk bottle, which he's painted white from the outside to give the illusion. As he sits on a trunk somewhere far from his house and smokes, he's bullied by a group of older boys for belonging to an Italian family. The bullying leads to a fight, which the street cop breaks and saves Louis before it gets brutal. He scolds him on his way home, revealing that the only reason everyone lets his troubles slide is because of his reputable father. He brings Louis home and tells his older brother Pete about his recent activities. Pete translates everything to his mother, who verbally scolds him. When their father finds out about his drinking and smoking, he beats him up in order to put some sense in him, but it doesn't affect Louis in the slightest bit. One day, he's caught drinking under the bleachers in Pete's racetrack and runs for his life. Pete sees potential in him and goes after him on his bike. He tries to put him on the track like him, but Louis is too demotivated for some reason and doesn't want to do anything in life in general, besides the fact he doesn't believe in himself for having any. Pete lifts his lowered morale and helps him make up his mind about running because he tells Louis that if he doesn't, he's going to end up like a loser on the street. A few days later, Pete makes Louis participate in his school's running competition. He purposefully runs slower and stays behind everyone, only to prove Pete wrong. But when Pete uses his tactics and says something demeaning enough to bruise his ego, Louis gets offended and runs so fast that he wins the race, shocking everyone, including their coach. Up next, we see Louis growing into a young adult, now much more focused on the path Pete paved for him. He's seen winning a big race, which fetches him the opportunity to participate in the Olympics. Pete sees Louis off at the train station, where he jokes about not joining him because he knows he's going to lose the race and disappoint him. Louis doesn't take offense and swears that he will make his family proud by participating in the next Olympics, which will take place in Tokyo 4 years later. The scenes cut back to the present time, where Louis's dream of participating in the Tokyo Olympics has been crushed due to the uncalled World War. Out of options, Louis has joined the military to serve his country. As shown in the beginning, they succeed in dropping the bombs and returning to their camp. The story continues from there, revealing their plane to be so dysfunctional after the air combat that it seems impossible to land it safely. Luckily, their pilot Phil is no rookie, who succeeds in landing the plane in their camp, where Louis catches Phil praying to God and laughs about him being scared. He then begins his running practice with an associate, who's driving his Jeep alongside the running Louis to keep track of his time duration. There, Phil and another fellow, Mac, arrive with a new crew and deliver the news that they're being ordered to rescue some men that their superiors think have crashed and lost in the sea. Finding those boys is as hard as finding a needle in a haystack, but Louis still volunteers. The only bad news is that their severely damaged plane is not replaced by a new one, which brings the boys to their doom. As they fly above the ocean, both its engines fail, causing it to crash in the sea, during which Louis has a flashback of him participating in the marathon and winning it with a brand new time record, while his family kept itself updated through the radio and celebrated his victory. As his flashback fades away, he finds himself floating in the sea. Unfortunately, their entire crew has died in the crash, except Phil and Mac. The trio gets lucky because it finds 2 inflatable floating boats. Phil gets a serious head injury, so Mac bandages him while Louis looks in the bags found inside the boats. The only food present in the bags is a few small boxes of chocolates and a can of water, so Louis strictly tells Mac and Phil to eat 1 square in the morning and 1 at night. He also emphasizes drinking the can of water in sips in order to survive more days, since they're aware of the fact that no help is coming anytime soon. The trio gets puzzled as they lay in despair because they're surrounded by water as far as their sight goes. Luckily, they're woken up by a plane flying above them the next morning, so they use a flare gun to send a signal in the air. Their hopes are instantly crushed when they're ignored by the plane, which flies away. Louis also finds all the chocolates gone, so he picks up a fight with Mac, who felt hungry and ate all the stash at night. As days pass, the boys become severely dehydrated and weak. They become so vulnerable that they attack a seagull that coincidentally sits on their boat. They eat its raw meat and get food poisoning. As they're barfing in the ocean, Phil suggests catching fish and eating them raw, which may not be a healthy option, but a sensible one. The boys survive on raw fish for 18 days but still end up thirsty. That night, they're struck by a sea storm, which nearly drowns them but ends up bringing down rain, which finally quenches the boys' thirst since ocean water is too salty and poisonous to consume. The following noon, the boys catch a baby shark to devour, but they see another plane headed in their direction, so they leave the shark and start signaling the plane. Unbeknownst to them, the plane belongs to the enemies, who open fire at the boys and puncture their inflatable boats. The boys immediately jump into the ocean and save themselves, during which their shark escapes. Once the plane leaves, they get back on their boats and stick corks inside the punctures in order to prevent the boat from deflating. As days go by, the boys become so malnourished that Mac dies while Phil and Louis become immobile. They manage to drown Mac's body with no energy left to grieve him. On the 45th day of their survival, they're found by a Japanese sea vessel, which imprisons the boys for being Americans, since Japanese were opposing Americans in World War II. They bring the boys to their secret base in the middle of the jungle, after finding Louis's newspaper cut out of the article on his Olympic win. There, they starve and punish Louis and Phil to the point where they become visibly malnourished and skinny. One day, they force the two to take off their clothes and splash buckets of cold water on them, before which Louis breaks into tears and whimpers like a child, making the audience emotional. The Japanese soldiers then blindfold the two and transport them in their sea vessel, from where they're taken to a Japanese camp in Tokyo, now officially declared Japanese prisoners from the war. On their way to the camp, Louis is able to see from his blindfold and be able to tell that they're in Tokyo, a place where he was supposed to run in the Olympics, but fate brought him the other way. When finally handed to the camp, Louis finds out there are hundreds of other Americans captured there. The Japanese soldiers make every single prisoner line up in the ground every day for a regular assessment. The in charge of the camp is a corporal, with whom Louis picks up a beef on his first day by looking him in the eye and not bowing down. He gets beat up for that. The boys are herded to their sleeping place, which is no different than a chicken farm, where everyone is pushed under one roof. The next day, the corporal purposefully asks for the Olympic athlete since he was told by the soldiers who bring in prisoners. Louis hesitantly raises hands, so the corporal makes him race a soldier of his. Poor Louis falls and hits the ground due to weakness, but the corporal takes pleasure in using derogatory terms for Louis, calling him incompetent and beating him with his stick. Soon, the boys lose track of time and are fully enslaved by the Japanese, who use the prisoners for their chores. One day, Louis witnesses the corporal severely beating up a few prisoners after finding pieces of maps from their clothes and suspecting that they're planning on escaping. That evening, during chores, Phil and Louis observe the sky and claim that the Americans are coming soon. The soldiers eavesdrop on them and rat them to the corporal, who wakes them in the middle of the night to beat them with his belt. However, life gives Louis a new glimmer of hope when he's contacted by a radio company in the camp and is offered to broadcast a message for his family, since the military keeps convincing his family of his death. The offer is too good to be said no to, so he agrees and joins the radio jockeys in their building. He tells them that he's getting to socialize with people after 2 years of slavery. On the radio, he drops a heartfelt message for his family and hardly stops his tears from rolling down his eyes, which makes everyone emotional. He states that he misses his mother's home-cooked meals and asks his father to keep his gun ready for their hunting trip as soon as he returns home. Thankfully, his family also hears the broadcast, in which he assures them he's being well taken care of and is kept in good condition. Oblivious to the truth, the family gets relieved to hear his voice, which is exactly what Louis wanted. Things get tricky when the radio people offer to speak against the American army in their next segment in exchange for comfort and riddance from the camp. But when Louis refuses to speak ill of his country, he's sent back to the prisoners' camp, where the corporal welcomes him with a passive-aggressive attitude. At first, he praises Louis by comparing him with himself and calling him tough. He claims that the minute he saw Louis, he knew he would be friends with him. But unfortunately, he couldn't do that with Louis being from his enemy's side. He then babbles about earning respect in order to enforce order. He tells every prisoner to beat Louis to bring order and respect to him, but everyone refuses to do so. He triggers them by bringing forward Phil and getting him beaten up by his soldiers. Louis gets provoked and yells at everyone to beat him. He takes their punches like a man and saves Phil from being treated like an animal. Soon, the winter falls, during which a small show is arranged to entertain the prisoners. The corporal personally visits Louis during the show and says his goodbyes since he's being promoted to another camp in Aomori, Japan. He asks Louis to congratulate him on getting promoted, but Louis is a tough cookie who only nods and stays silent, which the corporal silently takes as a personal insult. Little does Louis know fate will make him cross paths with Corporal soon. In the next scene, all the prisoners are lined up in the ground to bid farewell to the corporal. As he leaves, the boys play cards as a way to celebrate a night without authority, but their night is interrupted by the American military, who found the camp and is now bombarding it. The guards make the prisoners put out the fire by carrying water buckets. As Louise and a few others climb a rooftop to put out fire, they see American jets in the air and decide to let the place burn, because putting out the fire would be considered helping the Japanese. One of the guys reveals that he heard the soldiers talk about sparing the prisoners if Americans win and will kill them if they win the war. The next day, Louise is woken up by a prisoner who tells him about the prisoners getting moved to another spot after their camp is exposed to the Americans. The soldiers keep their next camp a mystery and make the prisoners walk through the city, which is now completely wrecked after the last night's attack. After the walking, they put the prisoners in a train, which takes them to a secluded camp on top of a snowy valley. When the boys gather around the new camp outside, they realize how it's worse than the previous one when they see the old prisoners of the new camp covered in coal dust doing full-blown labor. As those prisoners march back into the camp while carrying heavy buckets of coal on their backs, Louis and the new prisoners are rounded together inside the camp to preach the ground rules. Louis nearly faints when he sees the corporal marching towards them, revealing himself to be the new camp's in charge too. He reminds them that they're the enemies, so they will be treated like ones. He adds a new rule, according to which anyone refusing to work will be executed on the spot. When he spots Louis among the prisoners, he swears at him to look him in the eye one more time, and when he doesn't, he hits his head with his stick. They are shown to their living space, which is even worse than the previous one. The next day, Louis and other prisoners are tasked with filling their buckets with coal from the boat and bringing them back by an elevated ramp, which requires real energy to pull such a task. Poor Louis gets covered in coal dust and fumes during the labor. A prisoner falls off the ramps due to weakness and dies. One time, the guards also push Louis during the labor on purpose to show brutality. As days pass, Louis grows weak due to the condition. He decides to sneak and take a rest for a while because he feels dizzy, but a guard spots him and drags him straight to the corporal, who has no empathy for Louis after all this time. He forces Louis to pick up a heavy wooden log and hold it on top of his head, after which he orders the guard to shoot him the second Louis drops the log. As he picks it, everyone stops working and gathers around to see what will happen next. Louis soon gets tired and trembles, but then recalls his brother's wise words about never losing hope. He holds the log even higher and loudly grunts while looking straight in the corporal's eyes. The corporal resents him for his strength and starts beating him up until he gets tired and leaves Louis to rot on the ground. Louis spends the entire night in the cold and learns his lesson. One day, the camp announces a public shower for the prisoners to show Japan is moderate and evolving. As the dusty boys get along in the reservoir for a shower, they see an American plane flying above them, confirming that they've won the World War. The prisoners can no longer be held after the war, so they celebrate their victory and receive bags of food and accessories that are dropped down by the planes. Louis goes to pay one last visit to the corporal, but he has fled already. The film ends with Louis finally returning to America and uniting with his family after years of torment. I hope you liked the story recap. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.